Hello, this is the module on the cultural adjustment cycle. And in just a few moments, I'll disappear from the screen and you will see a series of slides from a PowerPoint talking about the cultural adjustment cycle. The model that we're going to look at today is called the W curve. It's a very typical model for what happens when people move from one culture to another. And remember how culture bump approach defines culture. So this could actually refer not just to national culture, but when we move from one life situation to another. For example, when we move from one job to another, we tend to go through similar stages. And the PowerPoint will identify 5 different stages. And then finally, we'll look at what happens when people return to their country, because there is a process that tends to mirror the entry process. We will look at the third thing that we'll look at in the PowerPoint is how this impacts in education. Number one, how it can be used. It's a very powerful tool to be used in the classroom. Number one, for students simply to understand the process itself and what's happening to them. But also it can be used in a number of ways, in writing assignments and in all different kinds of ways. Teachers also need to be conscious of where their students are in the adjustment cycle, because this will impact on how we set up our classrooms. So let's take a look at the PowerPoint on the cultural adjustment cycle. The cultural adjustment cycle can be used to look at movement from one culture to another, or from any kind of change. For example, from one job to another, from one school to another. But the same stages generally apply. The first stage is what we call the honeymoon. This is a stage where people are usually pretty happy, excited. It's a new adventure. And this will last for usually a pretty short period of time. The truth is that the moment that we go into a new culture, we're actually in culture shock. Now, culture shock is the second stage, and it has 2 parts, physical and psychological. And we really need to deal with both of them, take care of ourselves physically, but also understand that things may be pretty overwhelming. This will last for maybe another month. And then we go into the second stage, which is simply initial adjustment. That moves very quickly into mental isolation. Mental isolation is a very dangerous stage because people can get stuck in mental isolation. We actually have to work with people to move out of it. There has to be a will to do it, and to move on into acceptance and integration, where we actually live one day at a time in the new culture. As soon as we get adjusted, get ready to go back, we have an adjustment back into our home culture. Before we leave, there's return anxiety. People begin to understand that this really is going to go home forever, even if they come back to the country. And then when they get home, there's a return honeymoon. Everybody's happy for a very short period of time to listen to experiences, because their lives have gone on without us. And so we have to learn how to let go. The culture shock is really strong going back into one's home country, and there's even a feeling like they're betrayed. This next stage actually moves into a lifetime process of learning to integrate our experiences into our new life. The cultural adjustment cycle is really important in teaching. One thing that we can do is simply draw symbols for the stages. This is a very powerful little exercise for students to do. We need to remember when we're designing things that the adjustment cycle is it's authentic and it's very real, but we need to be careful a little bit because it's also very emotional for students. With Katie's story, it has a lot of both pre-reading and post-reading activities. But the other way that we can use this is, remember in the beginning of the adjustment, students are tired, and so we just make sure that they're very interactive. Mental adjustment, you can use that in various ways, but one of the things that's important is to have students look on the cultural adjustment cycle information. There's a wonderful story in the workbook about Katie that talks about how this shows up in an individual student's life. Different ways that I've used the culture bump: it can be done as a unit, teaching it once Usually maybe 4 or 5 weeks into a semester, so that the students will have actually experienced a couple of stages before they would talk about it. Or another way of using it is to uh, do it piecemeal, giving the students, as you notice students going through each of the stages, teach the stage at that time, and as well as refreshing them for the earlier stages. So, happy cultural adjusting. Until the next time.